So a little bit more on economics. When we talk about capital, which are the economic assets, there are three types of capitals, right, or economic assets. There's a natural capital, which is the natural resources, human capital, which is the human knowledge and abilities, and then the manufactured capital, which is the goods and services that are made by the human, made by the people. If you talk to economists, he's basically talking about the manufacturer capital, those goods and services, right? If you talk about an environmental scientist, then they'll say, well, none of these can really function without the natural capital as a basis. So that's so the importance of these kind of varies depending on who you talk to, right? And in terms of economics here, environmental economics is a kind of a branch of economics that is basically looking at the costs and benefits of environmental policies. Right. There's also this ecological economics, which is, basically says the economy is a component of the ecological system. So you can't separate them. And these economists like to put values on these, and these are called valuation of our natural capital. So what is our natural capital worth, right? So this natural assets. And the most recent value, which was actually more than a decade ago that they estimate this, I'm sure is much greater now, is that all of our nature combined is worth $30 trillion per year. This includes all the products that they produce and all the services that these ecosystems provide. The tourism and the everything you can kind of put a monetary value on about the ecosystem. You add them all up, it's worth that much. Just to put a price tag on it so that we can appreciate it more, or understand how much they're worth. So sustainable economic system, right? So this is the kind of the current economic system, right? Although I think we're kind of moving into some of this sustainable stuff too. Compare basically kind of our basic current economic system with the sustainable economy here, right? Basically what's going on is you have all these inputs, right? You got energy, ecosystem services, resource extraction, right? And then you got production and consumption, and then you got output as waste. And this is kind of the traditional economic system. More sustainable economy will be and look at the size of these arrows, how they're different, right? So that you have less energy input here, right? More dependence on the ecosystem services, right? And then less energy extraction. And this is because you're relying more on these ecosystem services, and also you are returning some of the waste as the recycle back into it, so that there's less resource to be extracted, right? So this will be a more sustainable economy because you have less inputs going in, less outputs going out. That's harmful, and you're kind of reinvesting in the ecosystem services, and you're reducing the resources used by reusing some of the waste. Okay? So that's what that is. Okay. And we're already starting to do this, right? This whole idea of this cradle to graves, cradle to grave system. Instead, look at it more as a cradle to grave, cradle to cradle. Sorry, basically. Recycling and reusing and reducing energy and things like that. That all is all part of trying to attain a more sustainable economy, right? When we do energy conservation, that's just reducing energy inputs, right? And using different alternative resources to reduce the total amount of extraction that's needed. That's also, kind of all part of this sustainable economy as well. Okay. Laws and regulations. Here we go. In order to understand about these laws and regulations that's designed to for sustainability, you need to understand a little bit about how people view the world and how that differs, and how when people's views are different, it shapes type of legislations and that are passed. And these are called world views, right? This people's values and people's way people see things. It shapes how nations approach policymaking, right? Let's see. It's basically how the way people think about how the world works, the role of people in it, the proper behavior towards it, and things like that. One camp is called anthropocentric, right? Which is a human-centered. Remember, anthro means people, right? Man. So anthropogenic means man-made, right? So anthropocentric means centered, but, human-centered. And it basically kind of the idea that humans have intrinsic values while everything else have instrumental values, right? So we are basically, the reason why we need to protect nature is because the nature is beneficial to us, and it's important for our existence and important for our well-being, right? Nature provides for our needs, and stewardship is part of anthropocentric view as well, because stewardship essentially means that we want to, it's our ethical responsibility to be good managers of the earth, and we need to protect it and make sure that it's sustainable, because otherwise we won't survive either. So that's a very anthropocentric viewpoint, right? Biocentric means that it's more life centered, so all living things have intrinsic value, right? So we have this obligation to protect life, whether or not they're beneficial to us. So even mosquitoes and cockroaches, have right to be on this planet, and and a lot of the kind of protecting some of the endangered species. Some people might say, well, what's the benefit of this little snail in this island? People who have anthropocentric viewpoint might question trying to protect these animals. People with biocentric viewpoints might say they all serve a purpose in this ecosystem, and we have the obligation, if we're the cause of their demise, then we need to do whatever we can to protect them. And the other camp is the ecocentric viewpoint, which basically says eco value on all life and ecosystems as well. And everything has intrinsic value. So when we say that we should stop mining, we shouldn't, or deforestation is bad because it ultimately affects our water quality and climate change, all that kind of stuff, that's still taking a very anthropocentric viewpoint. But if you're saying we need to protect our forest because it's just wrong to be destroying nature, and we have the obligation to leave the planet the way it was, that's a more of an ecocentric viewpoint. Okay. Another type of kind of approach to things that affects policy making is the precautionary principle. Now, we talked about this when we were talking about human health, right? When they're talking about making certain chemicals and substances available. Some people or some nations, some might take more of a precautionary principle, which basically says that anything that's questionable needs to be tested rigorously and made sure it's completely safe before it becomes available to the public. Or the kind of innocent until proven guilty principle, which basically says, okay, if you're, you can't really rely on, science is kind of still iffy on this, and put it out into market, and then if it turns out that it's not good, then you pull it off the shelves, and then you'll test it and all that kind of stuff. So that's the precautionary principle versus the innocent till proven guilty principle. And this kind of idea also affects policymaking too. So whether or not to embrace the precautionary principle affects environmental decision making, right? Because it comes down to how people or nations view scientific uncertainty, right? How scientific uncertainty is treated. And this, I think the best example of this is, climate change and carbon dioxide. So, yes, there is a little bit of uncertainty about how much climate change is going to be affected by CO2. So that even though the science is pretty clear, some people take that little bit of uncertainty and then use that as a reason to put off environmental, downplay. It's a reason to downplay problems in environment or implementing measures to mitigate future harm, right? If you were to embrace the precautionary principle, then you will use that kind of uncertainty as a reason not to risk, right, these adverse effects of this particular environmental action. So, sorry, this continues here. I had to post it. Right, so reason not to risk the adverse effect of particular environmental action because science uncertainty may come too late, right? So, for example, the Montreal Protocol took a very precautionary principle approach to eliminating the production of CFCs. This was before, really the full effect of CFC was known, and we saw, the full impact of the data that supports it. But there was enough information from the scientists that says CFCs could be harmful, so they said we need to, ban CFCs. The most recent Paris Agreement, that's also taking a precautionary principle approach to climate change as well. We're saying that we need to, we don't know the full impact of climate change is. However, there's enough scientific evidence to suggest that this could mean big problems in the future. So we need to take actions now to prevent that potentially from happening in the future. Okay. Agencies that for sustainability, right? There are some world agencies that you just kind of need to be familiar with. You don't have to know every single one down to detail, but you should at least be familiar with the name and kind of generally what they do, right? World agencies. So the UN was established in 1945 after World War II. It was a bunch of nations, agreed to kind of promote a dialogue because there's a lot of things that's global in nature, and we need, organization that kind of, allows people to kind of get together and talk about these things. So that's the UN, and under the UN, there are several agencies. The UNEP, or the United Nations Environment Program, is probably the main one that you need to know about, and they're, by the way, they're the one that was responsible for getting the CITES together and getting the Montreal Protocol together, because one of the things that they do is they negotiate treaties, right? Or organizes the negotiation of these treaties. They gather environmental information, they do research, assess problems, and things like that. So that's their main thing. There's a World Bank. The World Bank is responsible for providing financial and technical assistance to developing nations. the WHO, or the World Health Organization. They monitor, assess health trends, including health trends that's exacerbated by climate change as well. And then there's the UNDP, which is the UN Development Program, right? Which it's kind of provide guidance for kind of democratic guidance, also poverty reduction and crisis prevention and recovery from environmental damages and things like that, energy issues, and also prevention of spread of AIDS and HIV. Okay. In addition, there are, so this is not UN, this is NGOs. These are non-government organizations. These include, so these are international, include things like Greenpeace, the IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature. They're the one who established the red list of endangered species, right? WWF, which is the panda logo, which you're probably very familiar with. These are some of the non-government organizations. There's many, many others that operate at an international level. All right, let me stop here before I get into the U.S. stuff.